Hi, welcome to Edward Box Guitar Tuition. So my classic album inspection today is Judas Priest's debut album, Rocka, Rolla, released September the 6th, 1974. It's 50 years old today. So the first time I bought this album, I can distinctly remember the time I'd actually been on holiday with my family. I was lucky enough to go to France for a week. Back at the end of the summer holidays in 1981, so I actually had a week off school. So the weekend we got back, which would have been the first week of school back, on the Sunday I actually went to Kendal and to a shop called Smythe's Records. Now this was sometimes open on a Sunday, and usually then it also had a shop up in Bowness in the Lake District, which wasn't far away. And they had a copy of Rocka Rolla for $2.99. It was a cutout, so it was one of those albums where it was obviously European pressing with thick card that you typically get in France, Germany, and it had a cutout, and that signified that it had been a return. It basically shipped it out, and as copies hadn't sold, you clip the back out and you'd sell it back as a return to the distributor, I guess, or a label, and then it's sold on to other record shops cheaply. So I got that for $2.99. It was a gold pressing. For some reason I sold it. Later on I got a pressing on a French label called Milan. And then I had a CD copy, and then my most recent copy is the JVC remaster, which you can get. It's got lovely packaging on CD, and that is generally regarded as one of the best versions of it. It has got, there's these remixes available with the Hero album, if you ever had that. And there's various kind of versions printing on the back sleeve, with different credits and so on. So if you go on Wikipedia, you'll find out the sort of research, the history of the album. So basically Glenn Tipton only joined on this record just prior to going in the studio. So his influence is very limited, but what's interesting, he submitted the tracks Ripper, Tyrant and Victim of Changes, the reworked Victim of Changes, to Roger Bain. All these were put into the mix, and Roger Bain said they weren't commercial enough. But great news for us. How lucky is that for Priest? You know, it gave them an extra 18 months touring with Tipton, getting the band better before cut those tracks, which two of very much the staples of the history of metal, and Tyrant's a great live track. Okay, so what's this album like? This is the weird thing. There's two or three kind of anomaly albums in the history of Judas Priest. Turbo's a hair metal album, I think. So that's unusual. Point of Entry is a hard rock album. I suppose Nostradamus is a concept album. And Rocka Rolla is a blues heavy rock album. It's not a heavy metal album. And in fact, there's very little things on it that kind of point to kind of heavy metal. A lot of the guitar just doesn't have enough distortion to kind of punch up there. They haven't got as much gain as Sabbath or Budgie. It hasn't got the kind of cacophonous sound of Uriah Heep or the kind of power of Deep Purple. In a way, it's kind of more in line with, say, maybe Nazareth or Wishbone Ash in some respects. We'll come to that and look at that through the tracks. The other thing is interesting on this, a lot of the co-writings, K.K. Downing, obviously, and Al Atkins, because that's the singer before Rob Halford. Like I said, not much Tipton. And this is the only album to feature drummer John Hinch. Ooh, notification. So, I mean, the first track's One for the Road. This is a track I like. This is unusual. This is in 5/4 time. So it's got quite a kind of Hendrixy sort of bam, 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 you know, you can hear the kind of Spanish Castle Magic or a Purple Haze. Although I don't think it plays that classic Hendrix chord, it's kind of got that vibe. It's got quite an interesting guitar part kind of chugging along in the back. But when it starts off the track, you know, the drums come in, you can hear the guitar waiting quietly, the other guitar to come in. You know, you can hear as it comes in the sort of lack of distortion, and there's quite a lot of bottom end power on this. Ian Hill's bass is very prevalent and big, and there's quite a bit of punch on the drums, but the guitars just don't drive much. I like this track. I've always liked it. If you played it to someone with the note Judas Priest, probably not. Same for the next track, Rocka Rolla. This is the one where I kind of think of a kind of Nazareth. It's got a kind of bit of a boogie to it. Glenn Tipton co-writes this with Halford and Downing. This will be the first track we heard by them where you've got that famous writing partnership. There is a version of this which has an extra verse. It's 3 minutes and 5. quite interesting if you watch the old Grey Whistle test footage of this, where the band's getting more power down. You can hear the kind of chorus is actually quite powerful, with the kind of E, D chord progression down to C. Typical metal progression, but it just doesn't capture that on the record. I like this track. Quite strange. I mean, just the lyrics and calling it Rocka, Rolla, just, it's not a Priest title. I mean, it's just not. Very strange. Then you've got the next track, Winter, well, the next three tracks, Winter, Deep Freeze and Winter Retreat, and Cheetah. So these are tracks that have kind of been formatted in different ways. Sometimes it's called the Winter Suite, and sometimes they combine the three tracks on some pressings on Here or Here, I think they did. Sometimes Cheetah's included in this. But certainly Winter, Deep Freeze and Winter Retreat are certainly sort of part of a little conceptual piece. So Winter has a very bluesy sort of riff. This is Al Atkins, Downing and Ian Hill writing this. Ian Hill getting one of his rare credits. I quite like this track. It's got quite a good groove. It is very bluesy. Halford's sort of bringing out a kind of more bluesy edge, obviously aping what Atkins did, who had a more straight ahead blues rock voice. Pretty good. Then next up you got Deep Freeze. This is KK Downing going mad with his whammy bar. And it's got quite a cool end bit with the pick scrape where it pans. I think the problem with this track, I quite like it. It's just too long. It doesn't need to be 1:58. This is kind of aping Sabbath, I think, where obviously there's Downing's Hendrix influence coming through, but Black Sabbath have little instrumentals on their album, and this is the first one that Priest have put on here. Then you got Winter Retreat. This is just a little sort of ballady thing. I think it's got a kind of F major 7 chord. It sounds like the kind of strumming with the back of the fingers on this, the texture. I should say that the band played this live in the studio. And I think that's one of the problems. Maybe the room's a bit dead. Maybe the isolation of the amps. There's just not much breath in it. So that's a Halford Downing composition. Then Halford Downing composition for Cheetah, the final track on side 1. Now, if you listen to the guitar sound starting off on this, I think Glenn maybe starts the riff. This is there's a little more bite, there's a little more drive on the guitar sound on this. And I think, if they could have got the guitar sound all the way through, more like this, the album would sound better. I think this it's certainly the best track on side 1. I really like this track. It's got that mouth organ on it again, sort of recalling other 70s rock bands, more blues-based rock bands. Interesting enough, it's called Cheetah, and that's the first title of Judas Priest. Obviously, we know them for Grinder, The Ripper, Metalizer, and so on. But what's interesting, Cheetah, again, it's kind of more of a woman done me wrong lyric, but it's not kind of a typical Priest lyric. But I like this track. A little tale about this is I was on holiday in Amsterdam and I walked up to the Hard Rock Cafe to go for some food. I had my Priest t-shirt on and the guy goes, Judas Priest, Jay. He says, what is your least favourite Judas Priest album? Or maybe asked what my favourite was, and my least favourite. And I said Rocka, Rolla. And he was like, I always kind of like that. I love the Cheetah and that. And he got me kind of thinking, really, why did I say Rocka Rolla's my least favourite? Just because it doesn't sound like Priest. In actual fact, this album's been in my life for, since September 1981, so I've always liked it. It's just not typical Judas Priest album. Side 2, I was Never Satisfied. This would be the other standout cut on the album. This is probably the track that is closest to kind of the Priest to come. It's got a bluesy riff, it's kind of heavy dirge. It's got another 5/4, I think it's 5/4 time middle section. Again, there is some progressive time signatures on this. It's Atkins Downing, so Rob Halford's just used Al Atkins lyrics on this. It's 4 minutes 50. It's got quite a cool middle section with a cool solo, which I think's KK. But Rob just almost as a scream at them, satisfied. He hits a really big note. They did play this on the Epitaph tour, and I have been playing Rock and Roller recently. But this is the track, is probably the track that kind of people would look at and go, well, that's kind of the most kind of Judas Priest that we know. I mean, the kind of bluesiness of it, it wouldn't, some of the riffing wouldn't go amiss on Sin After Sin. Next track is Run of the Mill. Now, this was the longest track Priest did. until Cathedral Spires, and then it was beaten by Loch Ness Confess, your terror of deep Loch Ness distress. Thank you, Rogers Thesaurus, for that gift. There we go. This track, I like this. Again, it's got a delicate sort of clean sound where there's a little bit of distortion. It's almost like the plucking, maybe. Glenn gets out the synthesizer at the end. It's got a long middle section which breaks down into a kind of trippy solo, and you can really hear Ian Hill's bass quite a bit. You can hear a bit more of the Gary Fane vibe on Hill's bass on this album. You know, it's kind of standing out with more melody. You know, the bass would kind of drop in level as they went along, really, and then he switched to a pick for the Stained Class album. But I like this track again. Halford lets rip with some big sort of stratospheric, almost screaming at the end. And shows off what's to come. I do like this, quite like the lyrics on this. Quite interesting that Halford's written lyrics like this. It's really saying, you know, you're just kind of doing a base, you know, a standard job. You're doing that your whole life. What are you doing with your life? Something like Stone Dead Forever by Motorhead would be a similar lyric. Now, on the listing here, it says Dying to Meet You, Hero, Hero. Now, on every album you ever buy of this, it's Dying to Meet You, I think. But the weird thing is with the Dying to Meet You track, it just stops, and then the second part of the song comes in and he says the word hero, hero. So the argument's always been, should this be 2 tracks? Maybe it was kind of combined as one because they just wanted 10 tracks an album, because lyrically they work together. Dying to Meet You's kind of going, it's dying to meet you in battle, and it's kind of a play on words, and then hero, heroes, a sort of reference to, you know, the heroics of the day, I guess. It's Halford Downing this. I like this actually, unusual 12/8 time signature feel on this, and the riff starts, you know, before the beat. Halford's kind of doing his came in this morning. He's doing his Scott Walker. You know, again, Halford he doesn't really decide how he's going to sing till Sin After Sin. He's still doing his Scott Walker thing, which I like on Sad Wings. Sin After Sin, he kind of breaks away from that more. He's still just bringing out a bit. So Down to Me is quite interesting. And Here's got a really cool riff, quite a catchy gallop. I'm not sure who did. I think Glenn does the solo on this. I could be wrong, but it's probably the one solo on the album that's really good. The lead work doesn't kind of add up to much on this album, if I'm honest, but the solo on Dying to Meet You, part 2, the hero bit, is really good. It's got a cool wah, it's got loads of attack, cool phrasing, the way it comes in is really good. Interestingly, if you listen to the end of this track, it goes into a kind of harmony riff, very sort of Wishbone Ash. And actually, on Downing's side of I'm assuming it's Downing's side of the stereo spectrum, it drops a duffer. There's a duff note, if you listen carefully, quite interesting, obviously missed that. Then it finishes off with Caviar and Mess, so it's a little instrumental fading in, Atkins, Downing, Hill composition. This was originally a 7-minute song that had lyrics and everything. Al Atkins recorded it. They've obviously taken some section of it and just created another kind of Sabbathy instrumental to pad out time. I'm not sure really why they've put this on in a lot of ways. I mean, the album's 38 minutes and 49 seconds. If you take this track off, it'd still be 36.5 minutes. It's a perfectly decent length. They could have even maybe had 8 tracks. But that's it, yeah, that's, you know, there's not really a track, I don't dislike any track on this album. If I really like One for Run, enjoy Rocka, Rolla, The Winter Sweets, interesting, Cheaters, a lot of fun, Never Satisfied's good, really like Running the Mill, Down to Meet Hero, Hero's interesting, Caviar Meths, pretty mellow. I'd give it an 8 out of 10, but I'd understand, you know, I was watching a kind of retrospective on this on a channel called The Contrarians, and one guy said, you know, if this album didn't get a second chance with this album, you know, people would just listen to this, oh yeah, that Judas Priest sort of curio in the history of rock metal. I mean, one of the things that always let this album down was the lack of logo. You know, if they just had the Priest logo from Sad Wings and Sin After Sin and a cover like the reissue, with the Melvin Gang cover, or maybe the cover of like the best of Judas Priest, something like that. Just the whole logo and the rock and roll, the Coca-Cola thing. Apparently it was submitted for a Rolling Stones cover by John Page, who's a good artist, and it did win graphics awards. But it's just weird. It wouldn't even suit Uriah Heep or Purple or Nazareth or Budgie. There's no brand there for Priest. And what's weird with the Sad Wings album is they establish a brand. One of the problems with this album, if you're flicking through in a record shop, it's not telling you it's rock or hard rock, metal, heavy rock. And you're not going to buy it. Now, a lot of metal fans, if they see a great album cover, I'm sure there's people who looked at the Sad Wings album cover and went, actually, I'm going to give this a chance because it looks amazing. So I think that's one thing. Obviously, the production and remastering helps. There's just not enough drive on the guitars, and all the remastering in the world and remixing won't change that. If you listen to the Roger Bain remix, it's a little cleaner, punchier, but there's just not enough drive on the guitars. Like I said previously, you got that cheater sound. It would be getting a bit further. Allegedly, there's something wrong with the cut on this. Roger Bain went up to cut the master, the vinyl and the lathe, as they call it, upstairs after mixing, which is a really bad idea because you would have had dodgy ears. You got to remember, Roger Bain was what passed as a metal producer. Really, he did Sabbath, the first 3 Sabbath albums. He did some first couple of Budgie, I think. So for Priest, it was like, oh, we're getting this rock producer, but he kind of disappeared really. So that's the other issue with it. The other issue is Glenn Tipton's only just come in, and he can't put his influence in. A bit more time with Tipton, and it might have showed them up in the studio more because he had a bit more experience. One other thing I should say is interesting. If you go online, you will find bootleg footage, recording of Halford's first gig with the band, and one of the things on that is I forget what the tracks are. They might play cheated, but you can hear the timing's quite raggedy. And they really are a long way off, and Halford hasn't found his voice yet. It's got to be said, I mean, KK's great, but they really benefit from Tipton coming in the 2 guitar thing. I think that helped them stand out in metal, and they managed to get the Sad Wings, recording, and, it got them Reading. This album actually got them to Reading. It got them on CBS, so there's a journey there. I'm trying to think, there was one other point I was going to make, and as always happens with these things, it's kind of left my mind at the last minute. That's it, Diamonds and Rust. So on some versions of this on the CD, you get a version of Diamonds and Rust, which was actually recorded for the Sad Wings sessions or prior to that. It's actually a really punchy mix. I really like it. I think sometimes I actually prefer it to the Sin After Sin version. It's really cool, a little rawer and not as polished. So there we go, that's Rolla, 50 years old today. Probably, I would argue, one of the most inauspicious debuts by a great band ever. Look at all those debut albums, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, well, In Rock's a kind of reboot in it, really. Budgie's debut album's got some really good stuff, Uriah Heep, very, very, very humble. It's got Gypsy, isn't it? It's got Come Away Melinda. Zeppelin's debut, amazing. Hendrix's debut, amazing. Cream's debut, Montrose's debut. There's any number of debut albums by, great acts and legends, like Aerosmith's debut album's got Dream On it. There's just nothing on this album that the band could cling to. Basically, it provided enough material to go out on tour, put in Sad Wings stuff and get better. It gave them time to do a lot of gigs, get better, and then make the masterpiece. And it is a masterpiece that is Sad Wings have become one of the greatest and most influential heavy metal bands of all time. So quite a long one there, but quite a bit of detail to get in there. So remember, share and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.